Thank you so much for those who are logged in today. We are here with Dr. Ryan Ross. Very excited to have him with us today and to spend his time. I know how valuable everyone's time is these days. And Dr. Ross, is that you are the Associate Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs and the Director of Equity and Inclusion at CCCS, correct?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, I will hand it over to you. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for allowing me to spend some time with you this morning at your meeting. I really want this to be as conversational as possible. So if you've got questions, just jump in with them. I have to admit that I don't do well with the chat and talking at the same time. So if you just throw it out there, that'd be great for me. We've got about an hour and a half. I don't know if we'll use all that time, but what I'll plan to do in this time, if it's okay with you, is to just talk a little bit about the approach that I take to this work, my role at the system, kind of focus on a little bit about the context for the work we're doing, some of the support that we're looking to provide, some of the things that we're looking to do and are doing. I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing, or just give an overview of the work that we're doing with the CDHE ECC Council, and then we'll just kind of take questions throughout and finish up that way. Does that sound good?
Perfect.
All right. It's hard, yeah. Like I asked if that sounded good, but everybody's off camera, and that's okay. You know, don't feel like you have to come on camera, because I know that, you know, a little bit of control, having your camera on and off, just feels good these days, because we've all kind of zoomed and WebExed out. But so let me just jump right in. So this work, so I have been, just a little bit about me, I've been in higher education for about 20 years and spent the first 15 years of my career at the Community College of Denver in a variety of different roles. Coming in through TRIO programs. I'm an access and equity guy. I believe in it to the core of who I am. While I was there, I worked in TRIO, Student Support Services, Education Opportunity Center, Talent Search, was regional president of Aspire, did all that stuff. Ended up becoming executive director of a shop called the Asset Center at CCD, which encompassed all of student success and all student services, advising, all those things. And then eventually became a dean, and was the dean of student development and retention, and then got to spend a little bit of time, just because of transition and things of that nature, and a couple different times, you know, serve as the interim vice president while finding vice presidents and that kind of thing. 2016-ish, I left CCD, took the show on the road, and went and worked in Washington, D.C. Part-time, working on equity in energy companies, looking at creating a pipeline for students of color, veterans, women and minorities to enter into the energy industry, increasing the amount of folks in STEM and engineering, things of that nature. I did that for about 2 years, and then came back to the system when Chancellor Garcia became the chancellor. He became the chancellor, and we had some really great conversations about his goals, and they aligned with the things that I believe in. And so I've now been at the system for about just over 2 years last month. And so it's been great to be back in the system. It's great to work with Chancellor Garcia. I've always wanted to work with him. I think he's a tremendous individual, and he's also somebody who's not afraid to do the work. And that was a big part of coming to the system for me, is, you know, being able to do the work unapologetically, being able to support folks and actually doing the work, and not just being a figurehead and having just fruitless and meaningless conversations about equity and inclusion. And so my job is kind of split in half. I serve as the Chief Student Affairs Officer, working with all of our vice presidents on issues around anything pertaining to students. And so shout out to Homer, your VP, great guy. Just a tremendous advocate for your institution and for all of you. Just you guys should know that. I'm sure you do, but just want to let you know behind those closed doors, he's always advocating for you guys and for students, and respect him tremendously. And then on the equity side, serving as our chief equity officer, and really doing that with our chancellor. As you know, the board decided that equity was going to be a major part of our goal as a system. It's also something that the chancellor believes in, and that led to the creation of my position. And so this is the first time in our system that we've actually had somebody in a role who is responsible for facilitating the conversation around equity and inclusion. And I say facilitating very intentionally. It's not my job to come to each of the 13 colleges and tell you how to do equity work. It's not my job to mandate anything. It's not my job to feel like there's some sort of punitive measure if you're not doing the work. My job is to really serve as a thought partner with all of our institutions, so we can have meaningful change and start our journeys, right? And so the one thing that's really important to understand about all 13 colleges is that we're in a different place. Everybody's in a different place as it relates to equity. Everybody has some different things that they have to focus on. And so there's no one size fits all approach to this work. There are some things that are common between the work, right? Understanding bias, understanding the difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of, I think, the greatest challenges with the work is people are using those words interchangeably, right? And we have to understand that diversity is different from equity, and equity is different from diversity and inclusion. And have some level setting conversations. I fundamentally believe that the diversity conversation, which largely started in the 80s around corporate diversity training and corporate trainers, the conversation was flawed from the beginning, and which is why the conversation has become so complex and so hard. Because from the very beginning, I think we got the conversation wrong. You know, when it comes to white people, the conversation was like, hey, this is diversity. And in this conversation, everything except for white people was described. And so white people walked away from that conversation thinking, well, that has nothing to do with me. I'm not a part of it. And then for people of color, that conversation was rooted in a deficit lens, right? A deficit mindset. And so it was everything that was bad. It didn't appreciate anything about the real contributions, culture, and value that people of color bring to society, to the world, to conversations, to relationships, any of that. And so, people of color left frustrated, feeling like they need to go get a therapist, right? And so, beginning of this conversation, diversity fatigue was created. And so I say that to share that it's really normal to have those side moments when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's okay. But what we have to realize is that it's our job to get back in the game, get back into this conversation, and understand that I think one of the most important aspects of the conversation is that everybody is a part of the conversation, right? It doesn't matter who you are, whether it's the conservative old white guy who's 80, or the young 8-year-old African-American child in kindergarten, right? Like, and everybody in between. Everybody is a part of this conversation. And the sooner that we get comfortable understanding that, I think the easier it is for us to have these conversations that will lead to the kind of change that's necessary for us to do this work. From a community college standpoint, actually, let me put a pin in that. So I'm just go back to just everybody being a part of this conversation. An important aspect of that is understanding people's narratives and lived experiences. One of the greatest ways to understand something or to have a unique experience is to have a unique experience, right? And the only way we can have unique experiences is to understand who people are and where they come from. And I like to share a story about me personally sometimes, and I'll share that briefly. When I got to college, I went to college in Nebraska, and I went there. I went to college there to play football, and so got to campus a little bit early, first generation college student, had never left East Denver really before, a couple of times, but for the most part, East Denver kid, 5 Points Manual High School guy, hadn't really experienced much. Get to Nebraska. I have a roommate. First thing I notice is the Dukes of Hazzard Confederate flag hanging up in his dorm, and I'm like, oh great, here we go, right? Like this is not going to be good, And so I walk in, I'm looking around. He walks in behind me and says, "Hey, I got the top bunk. I was here first." No problem. We kind of size each other up, but have to go to football practice. And so the whole first practice, all I'm thinking about is going back to this dorm room. And what is this experience going to be like? Who is this, you know, country Nebraska kid? And what is he going to think about me? And I'm sure he's got thoughts about me. Coming in wearing a lime green jogging suit with Nike signs all over it, just being authentically me and super urban and all that kind of stuff. And we get back to the room and I just say, forget it. Like, hey man, let's just fight and get it over with. Whoever loses gets out the room. Let's just get this done. Like, I'm not going to deal with this. And he kind of looks at me crazy and, and he stands up, and then he says, I really don't want to fight you. I just don't like you. And I said, well, why? And then it turns into this conversation instead of a fight, which was a great thing. Turns out that, he hadn't really interacted with an African-American before, had a lot of thoughts and opinions that I think were not his own, that were given to him by family members and his environment. Me too. I had a lot of things that, I thought that maybe weren't right. And well, not maybe, they weren't right. But they were my biases based on my experiences, my background and things that I had endured. And so long story short, we agreed that the most important thing in the moment was that we're teammates and that, we had to play football together and that we would take the time to get to know each other and just kind of take it day by day. And so, that's over 20 years ago. That gentleman is now one of my dearest friends. I'm actually godfather to his children. And I share that because that's what this work is all about. It's about having those uncomfortable moments, but being mature enough and having enough grace in those moments to pull through what really matters. And that's the outcome. And the outcome is relationships, and the outcome is everybody thriving. Like, that should be our goal. Our goal should be for everybody to thrive. And I like to use the word thrive because it's something that everybody can understand. Sometimes when we talk about equity, because it's been so confused with diversity and inclusion, it's hard to picture it. But when you close your eyes and I ask you on your campus, who's thriving? You can very quickly see who's thriving and see who's not. And the next question is what are we willing to do to ensure that everybody thrives? It's a very different conversation when we're saying, hey, how do we come together to make sure that every stakeholder on our campus, student, faculty, staff, visitor, when they come on this campus, how do they thrive? What do we need to do? Right. And then that leads us to looking at our practices, our policies, our procedures. It hopefully allows us to begin to look at each other and understand each other even better, because the more we can understand each other, the easier it is to work together. And that's really important because now that the pandemic is here, I think I spend more time working with my little ones at home. But before the pandemic, you're at work 40, 50 hours, 60 hours a week with your colleagues, right? And think about how many, and you don't have to raise your hand, but think about how many of you have what I call parking lot relationships. The kind of relationships that you see somebody in your car, you get in the parking lot, you get out the car, you say hello, you kind of know where their office is, you maybe recognize their name by email, but you actually have no idea who the person is. You have no idea what makes them tick. You have no ideas what they value, no ideas what they do. And my question is in that kind of situation, how can you really get any work done? How can you really be there for, in terms of our system, 130,000 students, if the people who you are teammates with in the trenches with, absolutely nothing about, right? And so for me, this work starts at the very, very bottom. And that's just building relationships and understanding each other. And that's a lot of what we tried to spend our time doing um, the first year that I was here at CCCS. Um, so transitioning to community college. One of the other things that I always like to share is that this work is not new. A lot of people think that this equity work is kind of the new buzzword, the new flavor of the month kind of deal, but that's absolutely not true. Equity and access work is a part of our origin story. When you think about the Truman Commission, President Truman, when community colleges were commissioned, right? The very first things that excuse me, that were talked about were improving college access and equity, expanding the role of community colleges, restructuring, expanding government's role in funding higher education. Sound familiar? Right? Same conversation, unfortunately, that we're still having now. But the good thing about that is that this work isn't new. This isn't something that we all have to figure out how to get behind. It's actually the work that you signed up to do because you're superheroes, right? And I think that in order to work in community colleges, you have to be a superhero. You don't just come into this work because you need a job. I don't believe that at all. I think every person who works in our industry is somebody who uniquely cares about helping people change their stars, and they're people who are rooted in community, and they're people who want to see people actualize. And so if that's who you are, and A, that makes you a superhero, but B, that means you're aligned with the very core of our work. The DNA of this work is equity and inclusion. And so I like to just share that just to set thinking, right? Because this isn't new. Maybe some of the authors are new, maybe some of the articles are new, but the core of this work is who we are, and we've been trying to get it right, for far too many years. And I think now is the time that we do that. And one of the things that we have to really focus on with our colleagues is pushing each other in those moments, right? Those uncomfortable moments when in the pit of your stomach, something doesn't feel right, but you're like, I don't know if I want to say anything. Like, that's when we have to commit to creating culture, a culture where ignorance is okay, right? Ignorance is very, very, very different than actual racism. I fundamentally believe that 99.9% of folks in the world operate from a place of ignorance. Going back to my roommate in college, he wasn't racist, he was ignorant. I wasn't racist, I was ignorant. Now, and then me being racist is a whole nother conversation. I personally don't believe that people of color can be racist because there's no power. And that's a whole different conversation. But when we get back to this conversation around ignorance, right? The great thing about ignorance is it can be educated, it can be engaged if we have some patience, if we have some grace, and we have an environment that's open to that, right? And that's what our system has to be. We have to move, and one of our goals is to move our system in a direction where we can do just that, where people can come together in our settings, which are some of the most diverse settings in the country. And you think about what the community college makeup looks like because we're open access. How do we come together in that environment and make it safe for people to make mistakes and have really good questions and to be able to share their biases and then learn from them, right? Like, that's the work. And that's part of the work that you guys are doing at PPCC. I have the opportunity to work with Keith Barnes quite a bit, and just the work that you guys are doing, some of the things that I've been able to attend on campus, and some of the students I've been able to talk to, and even your president, Dr. Bolton, just seeing the direction that the leaders at PPCC, Josh Baker, just seeing the direction and hearing the conversation, is something that makes me feel really good about the direction we're going with this work. Is it perfect? No. But are we heading in the right direction? I think absolutely. So again, thank you for the work that you're doing and from the work that you're engaging in. It's really, really important. And the one thing that I have to underscore is that, we didn't get to this place overnight. Students didn't feel uncomfortable overnight. The issues that led to Breonna Taylor and George Floyd didn't happen overnight. it's taken a long time and a lot of bad choices and a lot of ignorance and a lot of things to get here. And so the reality is, as we do this work, it's not going to change overnight. It's not going to change with one policy. It's not going to change with one new chancellor, right? It's going to take some time, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and we're going to have those moments. Um, but we've got to have those moments together, right? We've got to um, challenge ourselves from a faculty perspective to be open to new things and to not take an affront on every change as an attack on academic integrity. There's faculty on here, I know that you may not like to hear that, but it's true. From a student affairs perspective, right? Yes, we are in the trenches doing the work every day, but it doesn't mean that we understand every culture because, we spent time understanding stories. There's still more to learn. There's still more that we have to be empathetic to, and there's still more that we have to do together. And so I think all of that leads to the foundation of the work. And so as a system, although we haven't officially said, hey, we're trying to move in a direction where our system is anti-racist, and kudos to you guys because you have moved in that direction. But that's the direction of our work. We're really looking to lead our work in a way where, again, every student is thriving, where we are the system where equity gaps and achievement gaps, which if you're a fan of Kendi, opportunity gaps, right, don't exist. We want to eliminate those things. We want to have campuses where no matter who you are, when you come on campus, you feel like your culture is respected. You feel like you have people you can connect to. You feel like there are people in positions of trust who care about you. And you have the opportunity to do the work that you want to do to achieve what it is you want to achieve. From a staff and faculty perspective, we want to make sure that you feel like you have what you need to do your job. The environment is safe for you to do your job, right? The conversations around equity don't just happen on the ground level with the people seeing students every day, but it happens in every department. It happens with every choice, every conversation is rooted in equity, right? And when we get there, that's when we can really focus on policy and procedures that look at that actually become anti-racist. When we look at policy that we're able to look at with an equity lens and look for harm in the decisions that we're making, right? Because the reality also, as it comes to policy, again, when we're making policy, usually we're making policy reactively. Something has happened, and so now we're trying to put something in place so it doesn't happen again. And so it's all a lot of times it comes from a really good place. But as we do that, we sometimes leave other folks out. And so how do we have the conversations in a way to say, hey, here's the outcome. How do we get there in a way that causes harm to no one? Or how do we get there and recognize what opportunities there are to ensure that everyone can thrive, right? We have to get to a place where we don't make decisions for 99% because only 1% will be affected. Because what if that 1% is all women? What if that 1% are all Black males? What if that 1% is everybody from the GBLTQIAX community, right? What if that 1% is faculty, right? And so we can't just play a numbers game. Numbers can't lead the work that we do, and that's hard, but it's where we have to go, and it's one of the directions where we're trying to move in from our system perspective. So, what are we doing from the system perspective? So the first thing was really level setting and figuring out where we were as a system in terms of where are we on the equity continuum, the journey that we need to take. And so in order to figure that out, we started with our presidents. I very much, after some individual conversations, I had the opportunity to come to every campus and sit down and talk with presidents, vice presidents, student affairs teams, students, in some cases, a few faculty, but I really didn't get an opportunity to talk to faculty at every institution. But I was able to have conversations with a broad range of folks on campuses. And then even, because just who I am, the local gas station right next to the college, stopping in there, hey man, how are people from that campus, right? So having those kinds of conversations Having the presidents take an assessment, we kind of learned what we already knew. One, we're in different places on every campus. Two, not everyone felt protected to do this work without retaliation. Not everybody really understood what's meant behind doing this work. But the one thing that we found consistently is that by and large, most people felt like this work was important and that we should be doing this work in some capacity. And so that was the kind of initial lift that we did. And so the second thing we did was we wanted to create cover and capacity to do the work. And so we started with the CEO Action Pledge. And the thought process behind the CEO Action Pledge is we wanted the community and all the stakeholders on campuses to see that the leadership, not only from the system, but from each individual institution, is supportive of doing this work and is agreeing to and committing to creating the kinds of things necessary for the work to happen on campuses. And so Dr. Bolton signed the CEO Action Pledge at an event, I want to say in February, and Keith Barnes helped us put that together. And so we kind of went on our road tour and had all of the colleges sign the CEO Action Pledge. And then from there, we had each college create, if they didn't already have one, an equity and inclusion council or diversity council, whatever each college can call it, whatever they want. But we wanted to make sure all 13 colleges had a group who were thinking about and looking at equity at their particular institution. And so the goal in the first year was those two things, and then completing an equity strategic plan that would cover at least 3 years. So we got pretty close. 10 out of 13 colleges got all those things done in the first year. The ones who didn't, it wasn't because they didn't want to. There were some things about timing and transition and turnovers and people in the right, being in the right place to lead the work. And so we will have all 13 colleges by the end of this spring. So that was the first part of the work. The second part of the work was to really support the colleges in implementing their strategic plan. So that's the thought partnership. That's the folks who sit on the system-wide E&I Council, looking at how we're supportive, and then helping colleges in that way. And so for me, what that looks like is a lot of one-on-one time with presidents, a lot of coaching around certain things, talking through different things that happen on campus. So there's a lot of that happens. The other piece is looking at professional development and how we continue to move the conversation forward. And so what we've committed at the system level is to make sure that we've got at least one or two major events each year that help us have the conversation. So the first year, that activity was the CEO Action Pledge. This year, it was the Pillsbury Theater event, where we had, I think it's about 400 folks from around the system were able to participate in that. In the spring, we'll be doing a women's empowerment conference that students will be able to take advantage of. So again, something major that the colleges can see, be a part of, but then also use to have their own individual conversations or be a part of the work that we're doing at the system. The reality is the budget at the system doesn't allow us to do training for all 13 colleges. But if we can role model that with leadership and through certain activities, then the goal is for the colleges and the equity councils to then take that work and bring it on to their campuses. Second thing that we've implemented, it's just got started, is what we're going to be calling the Equity University. And so that's professional development opportunities that happen through webinars and panels and speakers and things of that nature. So the first thing we did was we partnered with Global Minded. And so there's on the last Tuesday of every month, I host an equity conversation, a national conversation with leaders from all across the country around different topics. And so the first couple centered on COVID and African American presidents. This last one focused on Native American and veterans. I think we're going to take a pause for December and come back in January, but that's the fourth Tuesday of every month. And then in the system, we're rolling out what's called Equity University. And through there, again, it's just different conversations, different opportunities for professional development, for people to tap in. It doesn't take anything pretty much but time. And they're open to everyone. They're all recorded. So if you miss it, you can go back and do that. And so we've got equity conversations happen. And then we also have just practical application conversations, stuff around like us. We just had one on academic advising during COVID just earlier this week. December 15th, we'll be having, I think it's going to get announced today, but we'll be having a conversation on using the equity lens in policy, right? And so we'll have these conversations that we continue to just make sure that are available, happen consistently, so people can take advantage of them. And one of the things that we're really trying to do there is take advantage of the expertise in our system. Our system, as you guys know, you work with some really tremendous people who do some really tremendous things, both on campus and off campus. And so the reality is we don't have to go get national speakers to tell us what people on our campuses know and do every day. And so we want to have a nice mix of that. And so we want to highlight and give a platform to our colleagues who we can learn from, in addition to looking at national folks and things of that nature. So that's one of the next pieces that we're rolling out. From a council perspective, we've got the equity plans that were put together. We've got a council reviewing and providing data, not providing data, but providing feedback on the actual plans, and then just following up and being able to answer questions, help find resources, help find training opportunities and things of that nature. So that's a little bit how we are focusing on and supporting the colleges from the system level. The other major piece is supporting an equity lens and equity and curriculum for faculty. And so what happened there was we have about $5 million that was approved by the board that we would pull and provide grants with. Those dollars, some of you may have heard of this already, but some of those dollars were frozen because of COVID. And so we're trying to make sure that those dollars are released for next year. And so faculty and colleges will be able to look at those dollars to do equity work in the classroom. So those are kind of some of the big things right now that we're looking at from a system perspective to support the work. Other than that, some of the more individualized stuff is, again, me just getting the campuses, mobilizing our system council, and then having conversations and making recommendations on a regular basis to the chancellor about things that we need to change. So one of the more recent recommendations is looking at all of our policies from the system perspective with the anti-racist and equity lens. Some of the policies we have, I mean, honestly, when I looked at some of them, they're from like 1968. So I'm just like, no offense, 60s and 70s may have been cool, but I just don't think the world reflects 1968 anymore. So there's no way that this policy can make any sense. It just can't. And if it does, I'll be the first one to apologize, right? No big deal. But odds are we need to change it. And so that's one of the things, that's kind of the big lift that we're looking at now is going through and looking at policy. And the way we decided to look at it, to start with the oldest stuff first and move up unless something pops up that's really important. An example of that would be our student code of conduct. So we've got a committee that's looking in that and is ready to make some recommendations on change with that. And primarily it's to make sure that there's a consistent code across the system, and then also to make sure that restorative practices and restorative philosophies are built into the student behavioral expectations and responsibilities is the new name that we'll be proposing instead of student code of conduct. Like words like conduct and sanctions and all those things, for me, makes me think about prison, and higher education isn't a prison. And so we had to make some adjustments there. So that just gives an example. But we'll be doing that, and we've encouraged colleges to look at the same thing. What kind of practices, business practices, do you have? And go back and look at them. It doesn't hurt to review them, think about them, and see if there's somebody, some group that's not thriving because of that policy. And if that's the case, we've got the talent and time and expertise to make the right recommendations to change those things. Let's see here, going through my notes, things I want to share. CDHE, the Statewide Equity Champions Coalition. I'll talk a little bit about that. And really that was started about 2 years ago. And excuse me if I'm going to move a different direction here. I want to pull up some notes. But it was started with 2 years ago with just some folks, some presidents from around the state, and some other educators at CDHE and other places who were saying, hey, we need to think about having an equity conversation, and we need to bring equity to the forefront. And so that's how the group got started. And our chancellor was one of the first chairs of that group. I had the opportunity to accept the chair role for the next 2 years. So I'm the second chair of this group. And I like that because there's a community college focus, just because we're at the table. And so what the group is doing now, so I think in August, I think it was August, when the governor passed an executive order requiring state agencies to engage in equity, diversity, and inclusion training, develop strategic plans, examine hiring and retention practices, and all those good things. The really cool thing about that is we had already been thinking about and engaging on that work, and so we were able to come to the table with some ideas. And so this council was put together again, and the council is statewide. It's 2 year, it's 4 year, it's public, private, it's nonprofit organizations. There's about, I want to say about 50 people from across different industries who are representing the council. And so the goal this year of the council was to do a report. And so the report, so the report is broken down into 3 sections, right? So the first part is just the overview and the landscape. You know, where are we at with equity in Colorado? What does that look like? And there's data all behind that. The second part of the report is recommendations. What do we need to be doing? And then the final part is an action plan. And it's a statewide action plan. Some of the things that are really important to me is about the report is it's really challenging leadership to step up and not be afraid to have the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation. It's to just honor that these are real challenges that we're dealing with, and that we need to create spaces to do the work. The recommendations, this report will be coming out December 14th. And so we'll make sure that everybody gets it, but you'll be able to see the recommendations and see some of the action items that this group wants to support. And I think one of the values of this is you've got institutions working on things, you've got our system working on things, now you've got the state working on things, and you've got the governor's office that's supportive. So in my opinion, it's a perfect alignment to do real work. It's a really great opportunity if we take advantage of it and do the work. And so if you've got any interest in the council, or want to know more about that, that's something that you can just shoot me an email offline, and we can kind of dive deeper into any aspect of it that you want, especially after the report comes out on December 14th. But I think all in all, it's a good thing. In terms of community and supporting folks, we just, we're looking at our procurement processes. Who are we doing business with? Are we doing business with minority-owned businesses? Are we doing businesses with local businesses? Are we doing businesses with small businesses? And encouraging everybody to look at those things. Our small businesses and our minority-owned businesses are really important right now because of COVID. There's a lot of folks, as you know, who have had to close their doors or can't afford to stay open. And as institutions of higher education, we do a lot of business from paper clips to professional development, everything in between. And so when we have opportunities to put money into the community, we want to make sure we're doing it with intentionality. And so that's one of the things we're looking at the system office. And I know it's some of the things that college presidents are looking at and focusing on. And it's something that we're encouraging people to look at. That's kind of the 50,000 foot overview of kind of where we are, what we're doing, a little bit about who I am. At this time, I'd like to take a pause and take some questions, comments, anything of that nature.
So we did get one that came in, and feel free, the person, if you want to come off mute and ask this yourself, please do. The question was around how do we individually help stop the division, not only on campus, but as a citizen? This person shared they've witnessed road rage that involved two Confederate flag flying trucks who boxed in an African American as the driver and a white female as the passenger outside of Woodland Park. Makes them upset. I felt like if I would have called the police, it would not have made a difference.
Ooh, that's a good question. And I've got some thoughts about it. I don't want to say I have answers, but I've got some thoughts. So the root of that question is, what can we do individually? So the first thing is individually do the work, do the work ourselves, right? Start having the conversations with yourself, and doing some reading and doing some research and really checking your own biases and understanding what biases are. The second thing is again, going back to that whole piece of understanding other people's perspectives and stories. I often talk about, if you wrote down your 10 best friends or 10 people who you talk to the most and they all look like you probably need to add some variety to the folks you're talking to. So things like that are things that we can do as individuals, and to look at trying to eliminate some of the racial distancing that we create, just by proximity of living, worshiping, working, that kind of thing. We should really strive to kind of diversify our experiences in what we know, reading about other cultures. I mean, it could be as simple as, every week I'm going to cook a food from a different country, right? And as you do that, you read about the country, you read about the culture, right? Just something to understand and not appropriate, right? Like, that's different. We don't want to be doing that, but we want to understand and respect and value the differences of other people. The second part of that is, social media has become such a powerful tool when you see some of these more horrific kinds of events, and without risking your safety. I mean, if you can, when we think about George Floyd, the reality is for African Americans and African American men in particular, what we've seen with George Floyd wasn't new. But what it was horrific, and it was caught. Just like when we go back to Selma, what was crazy, what was the big thing about Selma was it was televised. And so when you see something like that, it's really hard to deny the moral code that comes with that, to say that this is not acceptable and something has to be done. And so the more that we can shine a light on those things, I think the better. And the final thing, like the police thing, there are a lot of mixed feelings about police right now, everything from defunding to needing new training to all kinds of things, and people are in a variety of different places, but what I can say is that if you witness something and and you can record it, I think you should, but I also think you should call the police, because you don't want to be hurt in the process. And so, and I think as we look at the bystander effect, and the bystander effect is simply, you're looking at something and saying, well, there's nothing I can do, so you do nothing. right? And there are some people who feel comfortable intervening, and then there are some people who don't. But what you can do is alert someone. If you don't want to call the police, maybe it's the news, maybe it's the news station, right? Maybe it's going live on your social media and saying, hey, somebody call the police, this is where I'm at, and somebody else can call. But I think the most important thing is to take action. We can't sit idly by and do nothing. That's the biggest piece, is to not do anything. And then finally, is the work that we're doing here, creating an environment where that stuff is not acceptable. Because the more, one of the reasons why bullies can be bullies and why racists can be racist, because nobody calls them, right? Nobody calls them out on it. And so there's power, because the collective won't step up, right? I'm sure you guys have all seen the whole thing, like, if I got a finger, it's not as strong as a fist, right? And that's exactly right. If we create environments where we're not going to accept these things, right, and we are going to be a culture where everybody thrives, those kinds of folks will find themselves on the outside of that culture, and we'll begin to move them out. And so that is also a piece of the conversation, and is being very explicit about what it is we value and what it is we support and what it is we don't support, and being unapologetic about it. And that's easier said than done, and it's going to be uncomfortable. There are going to be people who you really love and respect, but you find out that some of their ideologies or values are different. And the reality is if that's their ideology, that's their value, that's fine, but it's not welcome in this environment, and they'll have to make a decision to change. And I feel pretty strongly about that. Hopefully that was helpful to whoever asked that question.
Thank you. We got another one here. Joellen asks, as you have met with faculty and leadership across all of the system, can you share some specific programming or activities that stood out to you as impactful?
You kind of put me on the spot there. Yes, I've seen some really great stuff. Urban Male Initiative. I've seen some of the stuff that, quite a bit of the things that you guys are doing at PPCC. There was a lecture on, I'm not going to get it right, but the lecture was about looking at women in leadership through the role of superheroes, women superheroes. Fantastic. It was absolutely amazing. And the one thing about programming that's sad is when you have really great programming like that, but only 30 people are there. We have to figure out how to get some of that stuff out to more people. So seeing a lot of different programming. I think we're going to see more going into next year, now that the equity plans are being created or just getting finished up, and people are moving into that. Obviously, I think the pandemic has slowed some of that down, because people have had to kind of rethink what programming looks like. And kudos to our student life departments who've really transformed student programming very quickly, and they continue to do that. But I think we'll have to take a lesson from them to figure out how we continue to do the work we need to do and the programming we need to do in a virtual setting or hybrid settings or whatever settings we're allowed to operate in. I think a really cool thing that I seen is a return to earn program. I think it was at Pueblo, but what they were doing was looking at students from certain demographics who, for whatever reason, maybe they were anywhere from $100 to $1,000 off in fee holds, which stopped them from registering for the next year. And so they've start looking at taking care of those hold fees to allow students to register and to continue. And so I think that's made a tremendous impact on retention and enrollment, and just also support, really being true to the open access mission that we have. Because the reality is as we all know, some of our students have some tremendous challenges and life happens. And so when you're thinking about buying a book for class or paying the light bill, You know, like what does that look like? And so providing things like open education, OER, open educational resources, or funding, so you know people can access their Pell Grant for the next semester a little bit early, and clean some things up so they can continue on their journey. That was a really great program that had a really positive effect on a lot of marginalized students. So we're seeing things, and I think there's plenty of more that we can see. You know, one of the things that I hope we're able to do is to have a symposium type situation where we can see what other colleges are doing and see what we can borrow and learn from, and evaluate. Um, and then also at the presidential level is having these same kinds of conversations so presidents can get more comfortable, because just like I said, you know, as a system, each college is in a different place. Each president is a different place in their own equity journey. And so making sure that we're working with them so that this work can, you know, so it's a top down and a bottom up, so we can collaborate in the middle with the work, so we can ensure that it's getting done.
Awesome. Another question from Benji, which is kind of on the same lines there, about what are the most effective or specific programs or processes you've seen faculty use, but also are you familiar with Inclusified, that is from Kelly Hoga and Vijay Sathi, and what do you think about that program or approach?
Okay, so Benji, to be honest, the first year or so really was focused on student affairs, and it was focused on the overall framework. I'm just getting into conversations with faculty and seeing what faculty are doing. And so I don't know specifically about what Kelly and VG are doing. So if you can connect me, that would be great, so I can learn more about it. I've heard of Inclusified, but don't know enough to speak one way or another about it, but I've heard really great things about it. You know, most effective program processes. And so, you know, one of the real at a real basic level is really looking at applying an equity lens to curriculum at the most basic level. And so that's just looking at not just recycling the same curriculum semester to semester. It's really looking at tweaking it and looking at the class makeup, because obviously any given semester your class can look any given way. And so being able to have room to shift based on who's in the classroom. Good example of that, there's a music appreciation or cultural arts class at CCA. And this particular professor, one semester it's all about like Mozart, and the one semester it's about hip hop and Tupac, and how that works just based on who's in the classroom and what's going to resonate with the students most. And so I think it's making sure that there are examples that go across the continuum of society when we're having these conversations, and taking the time to look at that and research some of that stuff and see what else is out there to have the same conversation, but from different perspectives, or to introduce different folks who represent different communities. But
Brian,
go ahead.
The thing that I really liked about the Inclusified is it focuses on some of those things you're talking about, curriculum and content, but also about classroom practices. And that resonated with what you said at the beginning of this, that often these diversity things kind of push some people away from taking part that really need to take part. And the Inclusified their approach seemed to be more inclusive, obviously with the name, and really get to a lot of student experiences in addition to content stuff.
Yeah, well, let's connect offline about that, because that's something like when we're talking about the $5 million that we have for inclusive excellence in the classroom, like those are the kinds of things that those dollars can be used to bolster or get access to. And so the more things that we have access to put out to faculty, I think the easier some of that work will be. And there's going to be a few things that are being put together for the spring for faculty to help that planning process. And so we'll be able to talk more about that in January after our next meeting with our VPs. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate you. Well, the only other thing I'd like to share is I have an open door email, pigeon, Twitter, Facebook policy, whatever, however it is you can find me and communicate with me, please do so, but do have some grace, because I average about no BS, probably about 240, 260 emails a day. And so filtering all of those and getting everything done is hard. And so I'm usually good for an email return in like a day and a half or two. So, and, you know, and if I don't get back to you, I mean, I won't be offended if you email me again and say, hey, I sent you this. I'm like, oh, you did. And it's over there in my parking lot. My bad. Let me look at it right now. But feel free to reach out anytime. Phone calls, fine. Text messaging, fine. You know, I want to be as available as I can be. And again, just, you know, if it's an emergency, just say that, like, hey, it's important. We need to talk today, right? And I'll try to do the best I can to get to you as soon as possible. The other thing is to, as it relates to the equity and inclusion work, take advantage of Keith Barnes, who is your rep on the E&I Council, and Keith can get to me very quickly as well. And then, and just publicly, I just want to take a moment to just say kudos to Keith. I don't know if everybody on this call knows him or have had the opportunity to work with him, but, you know, it's my opinion that Keith's work has made it very easy to create an argument for me around the system to tell our college presidents that each school needs somebody in my role or Keith's role. Everybody needs a chief equity officer that reports to a president and not somebody who's not a director. You know, Keith has what he's done and what he's done with Dr. Bolton and the campus and engagement with faculty and all of that has created a blueprint that shows that the work is successful, especially when there's a lot of data that might support, you know, deviating away from diversity officers. And now's the time to double down on officers. And so just kudos to PPCC and Keith for making that argument really easy for me.
Thank you. Anyone else with some last questions? Feel free to jump on mic or throw anything in the chat.
Well, I think I had till 12:30. I'm always a fan of giving people a little bit of time back. And so, again, if I can be of any support, whether that's coming to a class to speak, whether it's coming to a virtual event right now to just high five and be supportive of, you know, students being recognized, whatever that looks like. If you have a community service event, giving food to the homeless or whatever. If I can be helpful, whether that's, you know, up front or behind the scenes, whatever that looks like, if I can be helpful, just let me know. And glad to connect with you. And I wish I had the opportunity to meet and hang out with each one of you individually, but that's hard. So however I can continue to engage with you, let us know. And then also, if you have things that you're interested in sharing, your expertise, just as we're creating this platform to do more development and training and sharing of information, let me know, right? Because one of the other things that I want to do selfishly is one of the other things that I recognize very quickly going around the system is the talent that we have in our system. The tremendous talent, but also the tremendous humility. So there's a lot of people who don't toot their own horns, and they're just amazing people. And so we want to highlight those amazing people and have them share their information. And doing that here is a safe way to kind of practice and put yourself out there. So then that way, maybe you then get the courage or just the bug to go do that nationally and represent your institution on a national level. There's just tremendous talent in this system. And I don't say that lightly. So again, it's a pleasure. There's Dr. Lewis is on here, and I'll be having some conversations with her and some of the work she's doing. And so the more opportunity we have to engage with folks, the better. And I need your help in doing that because I'm not on the ground at your campuses. And so I don't know folks unless I, run across them in a meeting or a training or whatever, but you see these folks every day. So if there's somebody who's just awesome, please connect us to them because all it does is it just helps amplify the work and it helps demonstrate, that we have a critical mass of folks really committed to doing this work, doing it the right way, doing it with grace, doing it with savvy and substance and style. I think that's really, really important. So if there's nothing else for me, thank you for letting me talk with you and at you for an hour. I'm going to drink a bottle of water and and bid you all a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ross. We really appreciate your time and giving us that kind of insight and look into what's going on at the system office and all the work that you're doing and at the state level. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Right on. Peace out.
See ya. Have a good one.